Hi there, everyone. It's 4 o'clock in New York. The extraordinary moment when Donald Trump went from disgraced, twice impeached, 4 times indicted ex-president liable for sexual abuse and defamation to suddenly, in an instance, disgraced, convicted, twice impeached, 4 times indicted ex-president liable for sexual abuse and defamation is just the beginning of the beginning, the start of a long legal odyssey for Donald Trump. And because the Republican Party has followed him willingly down the rabbit hole toward autocracy, the country now has to grapple with it as well. Having already spent the trial in an environment completely out of his control, defendant Donald Trump will now be subject to the rules, the demands, and the processes of the criminal justice system, just like any other American citizen who's been convicted of a felony. His right to vote, even on a ballot that bears his name, is likely to survive only because of a quirk of the law in his current home state of Florida. Washington Post reporting this, quote, if the former president had been convicted in Republican-dominated Florida or most other states, he wouldn't be allowed to vote this fall as he seeks to unseat President Biden. But Trump was convicted in New York, a Democrat-run state where felon voting laws are more lenient. Under Florida law, residents convicted of crimes in other states lose their ability to vote in Florida only if they are barred from voting in the state where they committed their offenses. In New York, where Trump was convicted, felons are barred from voting only while they are incarcerated. Earlier today, the convict returned to the scene of the crime, Trump Tower, where he and David Pecker of Michael Cohen hatched that plan to suppress stories that could have endangered his standing with voters ahead of the 2016 election. The ex-president predictably ranted and raved, saying he will appeal. He attacked witness Michael Cohen, a potential violation of the gag order, which is, as of right now, still in place. He also attacked the judge, Judge Juan Merchan, who literally holds Trump's fate in his hands. The judge set to sentence the ex-president on July 11th. That's just 4 days ahead of the start of the Republican convention. Republicans will nominate Donald Trump for a 3rd time. One complicating factor, the fact that he is running for president in no small part because he sees taking the White House as a way out of his legal challenges. But even that is not a way out for Trump in this case. New York Times reports this, quote, the proceedings will continue even if he wins. Because it's a state case, not federal, Trump would have no power as president to pardon himself. It's all part of how the American system of justice works, according to President Joe Biden. Here's what he had to say about the verdict.
Donald Trump was given every opportunity to defend himself. It was a state case, not a federal case. And it was heard by a jury of 12 citizens, 12 Americans, 12 people like you, like millions of Americans who served on juries. This jury is chosen the same way every jury in America is chosen. It was a process that Donald Trump's attorney was part of. The jury heard 5 weeks of evidence, 5 weeks. And after careful deliberation, the jury reached a unanimous verdict. And it's reckless. It's dangerous. It's irresponsible for anyone to say this was rigged just because they don't like the verdict. Our justice system has endured for nearly 250 years, and it literally is the cornerstone of America, our justice system. The justice system should be respected, and we should never allow anyone to tear it down. It's as simple as that. That's America. That's who we are. And that's who we'll always be, God willing.
The aftermath of the Trump election interference hush money trial ending in the first ever conviction of a former American president is where we begin today with some of our favorite reporters and friends. They have been with us since the start of this trial. MSNBC legal analyst Andrew Weissmann is here. NBC News correspondent Vaughn Hillier joins us at the table today. New York Times investigative reporter Suzanne Craig is back with us. And former U.S. Attorney, former Deputy Assistant Attorney General Harry Litman is here. Vaughn, it strikes me that Joe Biden said that as someone whose son is currently embroiled in the federal criminal justice system. I mean, he's not someone, and they're not a family, who isn't also facing accountability. The difference between the Bidens and the Trumps is that one of them seems willing to accept and live with the rule of law, and the other is now actively running as president against it.
His own son's trial is beginning next week. A Democratic U.S. senator is in the midst of a trial. A Democratic congressman just got issued an indictment as well. That is the Department of Justice at work under the Biden administration. And for Joe Biden, who has kept his remarks about this trial to a minimum throughout this, when Kelly O'Donnell, our colleague over at the White House, upon him walking away, asked him about Donald Trump's assertion today at Trump Tower that it was the Biden DOJ, it was Biden that was directing all of this that led to these 34 convictions, what his response was, he just turned and gave a grin. This is the difficulty here. When there is 300 million Americans on looking, and you have one man who spews out what are falsehoods and lies, and he may very well have the right to this appeal, right? And he may have very well legitimate grievances, but there are so many other things that he says. And on the other side of that, you have a president of the United States, Joe Biden, who is his opponent 5 months from now in the White House general election, who is in so many ways restricted in what he says, other than calling on Americans to trust the rule of law that has been implemented in this country for more than 250 years.
Let's go back to the moment we were all on air together. And Pat Berkey, my executive producer, said in my ear, I don't know that he intended for me to say it on the air, but he said there's a verdict. And I blurted out, there's a verdict, Vaughn. Can you take me back to that moment? What did you know?
I knew that there was a verdict. You threw it back to me, and I was like, but exactly what is this? I didn't know anything else. And that's when we got the note in that it was going to be 30 minutes from then when the actual 34 counts would be read. But that was the question, right? It was going to be up to that foreman to ultimately be the one to deliver the what everybody had agreed on as those 12 jurors unanimously. And it wasn't until I think Andrew jumped in when you were the one who has been so careful not to, issue tea leaves or read tea leaves throughout this, but you had said the quickness of which they came back at 4:30 p.m. led you to believe that this was going in a certain direction. So you informed me in real time as well.
Well, it just seemed clear to me, especially because they said they needed 30 minutes that to fill out forms that at the they had to have had some guilty verdicts, and only I knew from being a prosecutor, all you really need is one. So that note was a very good note. The surprise was it turned out it's hard to see why it took them 30 minutes because I thought it seemed unlikely that it would be all acquittals or all convictions, and but it turns out the 30 minutes was probably for some other reason. If I had to guess, I would say security concerns because this is an unusual case. The Secret Service would need to be involved. The NYPD could be involved because of transportation of the jurors, the alternate jurors. I mean, that just seems like a normal aspect and something I've seen happen. That's pure speculation, but it obviously was an incredibly dramatic moment. I would say that just to the sort of political overtones of this, where you have Donald Trump running on a sort of, just like the election, I really won that. This is a trial. I really won this. It's just like this was unfair. So the election's rigged, the trial's rigged. For those of us who've been in court, so I'm looking at these three people who've been there every day. This is the downside of it not being televised or not at least having audio. My biggest first reaction the moment I first went to court was the judge was so impressive. I couldn't believe how calm and dispassionate he was about everything. And you just had this idea, this presence of an adult in the room. And that was what kept everything so in control.
Well, and that's what Trump's chafing against. I mean, he was an adult who was extraordinarily even-handed and fair, issuing objections during Stormy Daniels' testimony ahead of Trump's own legal team and then sustaining them on their behalf. And his flashpoints of anger were against Todd Blanche in the opening statements, against Robert Costello as the defense's one witness. I mean, you can sort of count them on one hand.
Yeah, well, it was about propriety. The idea that this is a courtroom. And it's a place where facts and law and respect for the rule of law matters. And he could put aside all of the attacks on him, on the jurors, on his family, and understand his oath of office, and something I don't think Donald Trump will ever understand, which is that people act out of principle and they're not transactional beings, and that people actually understand this has nothing to do with politics or money.
Right.
It just has to do with the principles, and such a contrast of where we are in the country.
And it worked, if I may. We applauded the court officers in the NYPD as they left the scene last night because there was concern about...
The
reporters did, because without having an overly aggressive footprint, they secured that area.
It was incredible.
It was incredible. And folks were able to walk and bike and drive down the street, Center Street, right there that went along the courthouse. There was that park across the street, the First Amendment Park, where there were folks from both sides that were able to come out and protest. And at no point was there any sense that anybody's First Amendment rights were being violated. The officers were there, they were responsive, they were kind, they were ready.
And every
the
day
process worked.
They were respectful. Every day we have to, a lot of us were showing up at 6 and 6:30 or earlier in the morning to queue, and there was members of the public there that some of them were problematic and loud and arguing and fighting for lines and spot. I never heard them once raise their voice. And then to get us all in, they had to go through 2 levels of security, and everything moved perfectly. I never heard one raised voice. It was incredible how they ran it.
Have you had a chance to process this? Having you probably, as a journalist, most familiar with the facts and the documents, and just sort of your body of reporting intersects probably with this trial more than anyone else's. Have you processed yet what you witnessed and what the result is?
I think I'm still thinking about it. I went back to the office today and cleaned. I'm kind of getting ready for another story on Monday morning. It's funny how journalists, I'm like, okay, next. But it's just I mean, it really is. It's, like when you think about the minutia that we had to listen to get to this absolutely incredible moment, and it really. I think though what strikes me when I think about it, and I'm going to come back to the judge, it was just how he handled it. I saw him first in the criminal trial against the Trump organization, and just how well he ran that trial. Donald Trump wasn't there, but to see it on another level, and I thought his moments of anger were so powerful because he reserved them for I thought the right moments. That's sort of when I'm thinking about it today. I'm just thinking about, I can't believe we actually got to the end and it worked. But and there wasn't any real incidents. I mean, it was just really well run.
I keep thinking, Harry Litman, about the things that we were wrong about, right? People didn't think the 12 jurors would last. They thought maybe we needed more alternates because we'd go through all of them. We didn't go through any of them. People thought there would be a hung jury. We were saying it was possible yesterday in the 4 o'clock half hour before we knew there was a verdict. That didn't happen. What is your sense? And I watched probably too much sports analysis, right? The minute the basketball or baseball game ends, you can say what went wrong. My Mets just had a team meeting, and so everyone's already saying, "Oh, it was a team meeting. That's why they're," maybe trials don't work that way. But what is sort of the post-trial analysis?
A few things. So I think to Sue's point, it's all true, and Merchan was very impressive, but there was something very sort of bare bones, straightforward, homely, you might even say, about the actual process in a dilapidated courtroom that really contrasts with the kind of royal airs that Trump has always tried to portray, which is part and parcel of taking himself from apart from the legal system. The main thing that occurs to me, it's maybe because, we're law guys and we've been in this for a long time, but I found it a really gratifying day, and I know a lot of people are saying, well, how will the American people process it, et cetera. To me, the rule of law has its place. We don't want it to be all pervasive. We don't want the law to be controlling barbecues and voting and work, et cetera. There's always been this latent risk, and we're not out of the woods with it, that somehow people will reject the legal principles that were vindicated. On the other hand, there was a latent risk that the principles themselves wouldn't be vindicated. All the things that everyone said is correct, and moreover, it happened in a hailstorm of Trump and Speaker of the House, real leaders coming down every day and screaming about this process, and everyone, Merchan, but the 12 and the attorneys kept their head down and just did it in a calm, straightforward way. It was exemplary, but on the other hand, I don't think transcendent. It was better for being just a straightforward, normal criminal law process. And he now, by the way, there's so many ways we're just beginning to process his change of status. But as a convict, there's going to be so many ways where he's in a grimy, system that he has to submit to, and he's just beginning to understand.
I think last time I renewed my passport might have been the last form I filled out where you're asked if you're a felon, and most people mindlessly, check no. He has to check yes. I mean, just take me through what he can and can't do now that he's a felon.
Well, there are certain things that, can he possess a gun? That's sort of once he is a felon, there is actually a federal statute that makes it illegal to possess a gun. As you noted, there are issues with respect to his being able to vote. There actually, if he gets some sort of sentence in at the time that he's serving it, that may preclude him from voting, with the anomaly of he wants people to vote for him, but he will be the one person who may not be able to vote for himself. Obviously, it depends on what Judge Merchan does when he sentences him. But he also is going to,
right?
There could be. That's actually up to the judge to decide.
It's up to countries. Many countries won't permit him to travel to them under their rules.
Wow.
So the other is he's going to submit to a report. So there will be a pre-sentence report, and he is going to go in, and that person is going to ask him everything about himself. He is going to have to answer all sorts of questions about his finances, his background, and writes up a huge report.
What's the purpose of that?
So the judge gets a report. Both sides will see it, and it gives a recommendation as to what the sentence should be. And that is based on a whole series of things, but it includes who is the offender and what are the offense characteristics. So remorse, recidivism.
Right.
The judge has to decide what kind of fine should be imposed. So to do that, you need to know about the financial wherewithal of the defendant. This is, by the way, this is standard for any defendant, that there is this process. And he will be subjected to that. And just to be clear, it's because of his conduct. I mean, it's not being imposed on him. He made a choice. He was given a trial, and the jury found that he did it. So all of this is something that every defendant who has made a choice, a poor one, and is found guilty is subjected to this.
Will the report inform Judge Merchan's decision about whether or not prison time is on the table?
About prison time, about the fine. Now, the judge does not have to follow it, the same way that the judge doesn't have to follow the state's recommendation or the defendant's recommendation. And with Judge Merchan, you can be sure he's going to make his own decision. But all of that is information that he gets. And the reason for having a separate body, so it's not just the state or the defense, is that there's an arm of the court that is actually that's independent, that is giving that analysis, so that the court doesn't have to worry about is he getting the right information. But it is tested.
All I keep thinking of, though, is so what Trump is going to show up? Like the guy that told Fox News, I hate flippers, or the guy that walks around and then takes the mocha test in front of any camera? I mean, what Trump is going to show up and take this and sit for this interview?
When does it happen?
Yeah, before July 11th. But we know what Trump is going to show up. This is the point where every lawyer tells his convicted client, okay, now go there and show you're repentant. For God's sakes, you're a convict. He's not capable of it. Correct. He's going to sit down in this grimy room and just continue to fulminate. That'll show up in the report. It's something that Merchan can take account of.
What is the state of acceptance of his fate on Trump's part?
Today was evidence of that. I was in Trump Tower in the atrium, and there was anything but remorse. Donald Trump is a fighter. I mean, I wouldn't say that this was somebody who was brimming with confidence or enthusiasm or joy.
Yeah, he didn't look like that yesterday.
That is not how I would describe Donald Trump this morning.
Right.
On May 31st.
Was Melania there?
Melania was not there.
No.
Ivanka was not there. Eric and Laura, they were standing off to the side. But I mean, look, he was just convicted, less than 24 hours ago, and you didn't see a lineup of Republican lawmakers. He was there isolated in front of those elevator doors. It was much different than, 8 years ago during the transition when I was sitting watching those elevator doors for hours and hours as he had people go up and meet him and greet him up on the 26th floor.
Yeah.
And you see those folks there. We were guessing that most of them were Trump Organization employees based off of the way that they were dressed and where they were coming from inside the building included. But they were their little cheer squad. But other than that, it was more than 30 minutes of him referring to the bad people that did this to him, lashing out at Michael Cohen, but not by name. This was we called 2022 the revenge tour. I don't know what the next 5 months look like here, because this is somebody who has now been sullied repeatedly by the justice system, from the E. Jean Carroll defamation suit here earlier this year, the $350 million penalty coming from the Judge Engoron and the civil fraud trial. So for him, this is just blow after blow here. And this was not somebody that, I'm used to seeing on the campaign trail this morning.
Suzanne, you, I think, again, sort of sit at this intersection of known facts, right? Things that are known to be true because there are documents that attest to them. His taxes, his tax returns, his inherited wealth, his convictions. Now, his rap sheet is now one of those things.
It's incredible when you think about it. I mean, when we don't just say now he's a felon, he's also several times indicted. But this is, and you think about, I was just sort of processing New York's reaction today, not just, the papers, get me the papers, but the papers. But just going through the city and just seeing the reaction. I mean, he's a boy from Queens. I mean, local man, convicted. He's a felon now. And just, he grew up in this city, and just how he has been so rejected by it. I mean, his father was an incredible builder in the outer boroughs, and Donald Trump grew up in this, and several of his, he's had construction projects here. This is the city that he identifies with. He's at Trump Tower right now in Manhattan. And just for this to happen in that town, it's just such a rejection. And that was sort of part of how I was seeing it. Just, and, having also, just you look at the court, too, the court system, the New York court system, and just the incredible trials that they have put on and their ability to have processed this quickly. This is what New York is known for. It was a definite New York moment when I think about, kind of think about it.
The little De Niro on the side. Harry Litman, I'll give you the last word. I guess my enduring question is, Trump went to war with the rule of law last night, right? He's attacking the judge, he's attacking Cohen, but he's attacking something bigger. And I think the rule of law was able to fend for itself during the course of the trial. But who fends for it in the aftermath of it?
It's a great question, but it's a different question, is all I want to say. Yes, you can see the prospect, and it would be a terrible prospect, to be a catastrophic prospect, that somehow the democratic system deeply rejects this judgment. But that's not what we look to the rule of law for. We look for the rule of law. It's fundamental, as Biden says, but not omnipresent. When it's time, it's so important that it be there to respond. And it was, and that wasn't certain, I think. It hasn't been for many, a combination of sort of bizarre luck and browbeating and raw power have kept it in doubt. Now we are on the other side of it. He is on the other side. And there's going to be scores of ways in which his life is affected as a result. But look, it's not the final social answer. It's the final legal answer. But if we're a certain kind of society, that there be that answer given with certitude is, in and of itself, not complete, but a really important, no mean feat, I guess I'd say.
And it's news all over the world, to your point.
That's right.
Harry Litman, thank you so much for all your coverage of the trial and for being here with us. Everyone else sticks around. When we come back, we'll talk with another one of our new favorite friends and go-to experts on the trial. We've turned to him over and over again over the past couple months. Someone who had a front row seat to the specific facts of this case. Former executive editor at the National Enquirer, Lachlan Cartwright, joins us. Plus, will the guilty conviction be the line in the sand for a small but critical part of the electorate? We'll ask that question. We'll look at whether there are enough voters who are now uncomfortable with the idea of having a criminal in the Oval Office to make a difference. And still to come, the now criminally indicted ex-president risking yet another gag order violation in this morning's rant against his former fixer and lawyer Michael Cohen, arguably the key witness in this historic case against him. Michael Cohen will be here live on set to talk about all of it, everything, when Deadline White House continues after a quick break. Don't go anywhere. Joining us at the table once again is the former executive editor with American Media Inc., special correspondent for The Hollywood Reporter. Lachlan Cartwright is back. Andrew Vaughn and Sue are still here. Lachlan, we could not finish out the week and this historic news event without bringing you back. I mean, I needed to talk to you when we saw what the 4 questions were and what the readback requests were. And I was dying to know, and you actually just answered in the break, but did you have a sense or a gut on how this was heading based on the specific chunks of testimony they wanted read back, especially Pecker?
Yes, as soon as we got that note saying they wanted the read back of David Pecker, my initial thought was, OK, they've come to a decision on the docs. They've looked at that paper and they've got there. But where they're now trying to get to is the underlying crime, which was this scheme to influence the 2016 election. And they needed to hear David Pecker's testimony again, which was, you know, the first witness for a reason. And a month ago, as we sort of were all trying to remember back to them, because we've gone through so much since then. And the key indicators were not just that bit of testimony, the bit about the Trump Tower meeting, but also about Karen McDougal and her life rights and that key conversation with David Pecker. All those indicators came back to me in my New York Times magazine piece where AMI was at the centre of this case. And leading up to it, even a year ago when I was down at court for the indictment, and everyone had said, oh, it's Stormy Daniels, it's hush money. And I thought, if Stormy's in here, Karen McDougal has to be in that indictment. And then when I was reading through, it was Stormy, Karen and Dino. It was a reunion tour. I said that to you on the first time. It was the AMI reunion tour. And that was when I thought, I've got to write this piece. And I ran into Jake, the editor of the Times Mag at the ASBs that same week and pitched it to him. But again, that kind of thought process came back to me as the jury is at that moment and they've decided about the docs, and to get the misdemeanor to the felony, they need to confirm this underlying plot. They need to put David Pecker and Donald Trump and Cohen all in this conspiracy, and they did.
Trump was convicted on 34 felony counts, not because of Michael Cohen or Stormy Daniels, who his lawyers savaged, but because of David Pecker, who his lawyers did not. What else does David Pecker know? Why is Trump being so nice to him?
I think that David Pecker and Donald Trump's relationship goes back many, many, many years. And while I would love to tell the viewers there's some bombshell vault of documents in Boca Raton, Florida, that I'm about to write a book about, I can't say that that is the actual truth. But what I think is one of the most interesting twists about all of this that we've been talking about for weeks and weeks and weeks, David Pecker, who corrupted this media organization, who twisted and turned a tabloid news organization into a criminal enterprise, that was the reason that we're all here is because of the press, because of the likes of the Wall Street Journal, that first initial story before the election where the catch and kill phrase, comes out for the first time, and no one really noticed it. It got swallowed up before the election because we're all still
Monday before the election, right?
Right. It was just the days before the election, right. And we were all still talking about Access Hollywood, and so no one really noticed that initial story, and then the follow-up reporting by the Associated Press, by the New York Times, by the New Yorker, and these series of news organizations are all competing to land the Stormy Daniels story, and that really drove it home. And these stories kept appearing in different outlets, and prosecutors started noticing, and that's when Michael Cohen was raided that April. I remember sitting there thinking, OK, now we're at somewhere. This is confirming to me what I always thought when I was there, that something dodgy is going on. And this is, I walked out of court last night, I just thought, my golly gosh, I not only have lived this, I've survived to tell the tale. And for me, it was a little sense of validation that, I'm a little bit crazy, not as crazy as my mate said down the pub when I first was telling them something like this was going on. But it was a nice moment to me when I heard that first guilty, and then I heard it 34 more times. And I thought to myself, boom, the system worked. Judge Mershon, his court worked, that jury worked. And it was such a beautiful moment coming out last night. And I just thought, boom.
I have to say, I met Lachlan a few years ago, and I remember going out for drinks with you once, and he was telling me these stories, and you're just like, are you kidding me? Like, it almost didn't make sense. I'm sort of like, was worried about you.
You thought I was bonkers.
Yeah.
You weren't the only one.
But Trump benefits from all of the other people thinking they're nuts. And I wonder what, I've likened it to the movie, the movie version of the book, The Firm. What is, again, like your moment where you go running out and become a source for your own media organization?
I think one of the defining moments is when Dylan Howard told me that he'd gone out to California, he'd interviewed a woman, she had a credible story about an affair with Donald Trump, and that her name was Karen McDougal. And I was like, Ripper, when are we going to run this story? What do you need from me? What are we doing? Oh, we're not running it. David Pecker has purchased this story and has killed it to help Donald Trump. And I just thought, where am I? In what world are we doing this? And then another series of events in the lead up to the election involving purchasing of supposed emails that came from Italian intelligence that we had to get translated right on the eve of the election, and getting that call from the Wall Street Journal and Lucas Elpert. And I just thought, this story needs to be in the public domain. This story deserves to be in the public interest. It's days before the election, and that's when I walked down outside of AMI and I said to Lucas Elpert, this is a catch and kill. And the reason I use that term is to give me some cover, because I knew that they would be looking for who the source was on the inside. What was interesting in the case, that comes up where Donald Trump and Michael Cohen say to David Pecker, well, there's someone inside. He says, no, there's no. Well, we've got this all kind of locked down. We're all good. Everything's in that safe that became my footrest that I had to then open up to get the document to give to the Wall Street Journal, and couldn't get that safe closed, and was panicking that any moment Dylan Howard could come into my office. So, it's been a surreal few weeks.
The other thing that it's the National Enquirer, but you signed an NDA to leave. Like, Donald Trump was saying today, everybody knows what an NDA is. Like, everybody has one who works for any company. Like, that is not only not true, and then you work for a news organization. They are the third rail in news organizations. Like, to even imagine a news organization trying to gag an employee on the way out the door or about anything. And I think again, I broke my NDA to help as a source behind the scenes. I then publicly broke it for that New York Times Magazine piece. There's a wider conversation we could have at another juncture, I think, about how NDAs are used to cover up for criminality, because in this case, both Harvey Weinstein and AMI's involvement there, and with Donald Trump, we've seen how these documents were used to try and muzzle me for the same information that David Pecker then went on and testified about. And I'm still processing all of this, but it's kind of a beautiful moment for me, knowing that David Pecker was dotting around the courtroom. Dylan Howard is God knows where in Australia right now, and I'm living my best life. And that NDA is going to get framed on the wall with all the other legal threats they sent me over the years. And anyone who's under an NDA, anyone who's going through what I did, I hope that they can get something out of my story, to know that they can come out the other side. They can trust the journalists to tell their story and not feel like they're being suffocated like I was.
Let me ask you one last question about the women. I think Karen McDougal posted something on social media with Brendan Farrow's Catch and Kill, sort of in the background. What about the women? They don't really seem to have advocates or voices, even on the other side of criminal convictions.
Well, how brave was Stormy Daniels to sit through all of that we were witnessing as they kept trying to demean her over her work, and they kept trying to, just smear her in this constant attack that was going on. And we were sitting there, Karen McDougal, equally, brave in terms of telling her story to, a couple of different journos to help get this out there. And again, NDAs being used to try and smother their stories, and they became
by white men.
Yes, exactly. Key parts of this story to stand up to those documents. And we're more lucky for that. And as we approach this election, I think it's really gratifying to know that the system worked, the court worked, and the Fourth Estate worked.
It's great to have you back here today. And we do have to have that other conversation, because the thing that I went to bed and sort of woke up thinking is, if this is what he did in 2016, what's he doing in 2024? Right? If this was the conspiracy to keep stuff out of the press then, Trump doesn't have new plays, but he also doesn't change.
Well, 16 was a plot to influence the election through American media. 20, we saw what went on January 6th.
Right.
I'm somewhat optimistic with 24, knowing that these systems do work.
Yeah.
These people do work. And I think that's one great takeaway to come of this.
All right, to be continued. Everyone sticks around. Up next for us, is there a voter out there who will hear the dog whistle that is the guilty conviction of the Republican candidate for president and change their vote in November? We'll ask. Don't go anywhere.
What happens if he does get elected and all those charges are he's found guilty of? Do we want a president that wants to sit there with all the guilty charges against him, possibly going to prison, doing his oath, his duty while in prison?
He's going on trial for this and that and this and that. He's really the felon in charge instead of the commander-in-chief.
I don't think any person who has gotten close enough to being indicted for a felony should be anywhere near the presidency. It's just embarrassing.
Are we still capable of being embarrassed as a country? That is the question. Now that Donald Trump has been found guilty on 34 felony counts in the election interference hush money criminal trial against him, he becomes the first ex-president and presumptive major party nominee to be convicted on felony charges. These are the kinds of voters who could have an outsized impact in November's election. While there's belief that the ex-president's new criminal status could boost him politically with his own base as they continue to rail against the rule of law in America, the founder of Republican Voters Against Trump, Sarah Longwell, says this of yesterday's verdict, quote, "It won't be a public opinion earthquake, but in an election where inches will matter, this just created a new barrier for undecided swing voters voting for a convicted felon." Joining our conversation is the executive director of Republican Voters Against Trump, publisher of The Bulwark. Sarah Longwell's back with us. Sarah, you were the first person I wanted to talk to once this news sort of came through and ended up on the front page with huge banner headlines. And my question is, who do you hope sees this? Who's still open to news?
Look, the persuadable voters or the swing voters in the 2024 election are voters who sort of don't like either candidate very much. Sometimes we call them the double haters or the double doubters or the epochs on both their housers. But they're people, they are center-right voters. Many of them are Trump voters, but they don't want to vote for Trump again. And in fact, just before I came on here, I was listening to a focus group that we're convening right now as we speak of two-time Trump voters who rate Trump as doing a very bad job. They view him unfavorably. And those are the people who we are trying to persuade to not vote for Trump in the 2024 election. And we asked them the impact of this verdict on how they were thinking about voting for Trump. And 5 of the 9 said it made them less likely to be willing to vote for Trump. 1 said it made them more likely, and 3 said it made no difference. And so I haven't done enough focus groups to know how it's going to impact people broadly, but I do take that sounds about right to me. For these voters who don't like Trump very much, because that's the thing about double haters. I always try to remind people we're calling them double haters because they don't like either candidate very much, but they don't actually hate Joe Biden. They really hate Donald Trump. They maybe aren't enthusiastic about Joe Biden. They maybe wish there was somebody else other than Joe Biden. But Donald Trump scares them. And so whenever there's something like this, a verdict where he has now been found guilty on 34 counts, he is a felon, that does raise the bar for these voters to say, I don't think I can get there on him. And so I'm hearing a lot of analysis that sort of dismisses the idea that it would make any difference. And I just think that's wrong. I think, like I said in that tweet, it's not an inflection point where it's going to change the entire trajectory of the race, but it will have a marginal impact on these marginal swing voters in an election that's going to be decided at the margins. And so I absolutely think that it matters.
Yeah, I mean, I think that people are staring at, the wrong part of the portrait, right? They're staring at the people who were willing to go to the U.S. Capitol on January 6th to, quote, hang Mike Pence. Of course, those people are not moved by 34 felony convictions. Of course not. But if you look at the people that you're talking about, the people who used to have Trump flags in front of their house, who used to wear a MAGA hat to the grocery store, anecdotally, the evidence is everywhere that there are a lot fewer Trump flags than there were in 16 and 20, that there are a lot fewer red cap MAGA wearers outside of those who were willing to travel to Washington on January 6th. Can you talk to me about the moment that exists right now in terms of permission structures for for sort of the rule of law Republicans to say, hey, I'm out?
Yeah, so here's what happened is for a lot of these voters who liked Trump, who voted for him twice, their breaking point, when we make these ads for Republican voters against Trump, we make these testimonials. The number one reason we hear from people who voted for Trump twice and won't vote for him again is because of January 6th. It was a break glass moment for them, right? That's when they were out, they were done. It was a red line. And so, but one of the things that's been happening, right, is that as the sort of Republican apparatus has continued to downplay what happened on January 6th, right? You're seeing the circling of the wagons, people like Nikki Haley endorsing Donald Trump despite condemning what happened on January 6th, despite them understanding that Donald Trump was refusing to engage in the peaceful transfer of power and even fomenting a coup. They're still going ahead and saying, oh, yeah, we'll take him. And so some of those voters, seeing the entire Republican establishment sort of crawl back to Trump, they get pulled in that direction too, pulled sort of home to the tribe. And what this conviction does is it helps reinforce for the ones who said, no, that was my red line, I'm out. Even as they're trying to sort of pull you back in, they say, no, this guy should not be anywhere near the White House. And I'll say the other thing about this trial, I'm glad it's over. I'm glad to see the conviction. I'm glad to see the accountability. But I do think the thing about the trial was that it did keep people looking backwards to some degree. The Stormy Daniels things have been litigated in the voters' minds for a long time. We need people to start looking forward in terms of what another 4 years of Trump means. And I think the added element of a convicted felon just helps underscore the criminality that hangs over everything that Donald Trump does and is one of the reasons he has no business being near the White House again.
Sarah, has the Biden campaign reached out to you? And if they asked for your advice and you gave them, 2 pieces of advice, what would it be?
Look, I think my biggest piece of advice is you need center-right surrogates. And you need surrogates in general. Look, I think it's not a secret that Joe Biden himself is maybe not the strongest messenger. And you need every Democrat right now. And at these moments, right, these moments when there is a chance to really hit Trump hard, go on offense, you need all your surrogates flooding the zone out there saying, this guy's a convicted felon. It is unacceptable. The American people don't want a convicted felon. Help the American people understand why this is such an important moment. That would be my biggest piece of advice, and especially reaching out to those on the center right who can help be surrogates in that regard as well.
Sarah Longwell, we'll continue to turn for you on these big moments. We have to sneak in a quick break. We'll get reaction from the table next.
She shouldn't be allowed to run. Okay. If she were to win this election, it would create an unprecedented constitutional crisis. In that situation, we could very well have a sitting president under felony indictment and ultimately a criminal trial. It would grind government to a halt.
There's always a projection.
So, right, I'm sitting there looking, well, I have to take a logical approach to what he's just saying, because, of course, there's no logic to that. And so that's where I'm going to start. I'm going to try and connect what Lachlan was talking about to what Sarah was talking about. And so one of the things that Donald Trump is saying today is now it's not a rigged election, it's a rigged trial. Mm-hmm. If he loses, it's rigged. And on the rigged trial, since I'm like a nerd and I believe in facts and I believe in the rule of law, but just going to facts, what I would say to someone who's saying this is a rigged trial is David Pecker. Let's just take David Pecker. Mm-hmm. We'll turn to Hope Hicks next and Jeff McConney next, but David Pecker is yours. Mm-hmm. This is your friend. This is somebody you have never, ever to this day said is a liar. Mm-hmm. You have not challenged anything he said. Walk me through why this trial is rigged when David Pecker is the government's first witness and you are not saying he is lying when he says under oath he had this illegal agreement with you to catch and kill and to foment fake stories of your adversaries. what part of that, it did not give you due process that when you decided not to challenge that, what part of that is rigged? And then you go on to the next witness, Hope Hicks. All of these, it's like the January 6th committee where these are insiders. These are your people. Right. So I know you want to talk about Michael Cohen, but let's talk about all of these witnesses. This is the juror's first note was about David Pecker. So just get people to focus on what, I know this is a shock, the facts. Yeah. And there is a written record. This is not one where it's debatable. There's a transcript. And so you can put a label on it that says it's rigged, but we all know, not just because a whole bunch of us were actually in court, but there is a transcript that disproves that.
You know, it is going to be a test of not just the durability of his base. I feel like that's the story of the last two cycles, but whether he can grow that base and convince anyone, because he can't win with just the base, right? I mean, that's the lesson of 2020. But can he convince anyone outside of his base that all these people that he loved, that still love him, were part of a rigged trial against him?
Because he has said November 5th is going to be the real verdict day, right? The American public is going to have the chance to decide. I go back to 3 weeks after Donald Trump was inaugurated in January of 2017. And that was the first time I went out and began asking voters. This was right after Michael Flynn, who was his national security advisor, resigned because he had lied about his communications with the Russian ambassador before the inauguration day. And that's when I was first having conversations with voters. What do you think about Donald Trump now? You know, I've had that conversation repeatedly for 8 years. What do you think about Donald Trump taking the word of Vladimir Putin instead of U.S. intelligence agencies? What do you think about Kim Jong-un and calling him a friend and love letters? What do you think about his COVID response? What do you think about the January 6th Capitol attack? What do you think about the classified documents? I can't tell you how many times I've had this very conversation with the voters. This time, is it different? There are 34 felony counts. We are going to get that answer this summer in our conversations with voters in Georgia, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Arizona. What is the elasticity of the United States today? Because we have pressure tested it for 8 years now, and it has hit at the conscience of the American people in the conversations that are happening in communities around this country. How far will that go? That is going to be the conversation of the summer of 2024.
Andrew, Vaughn, Sue, Lachlan, not just for today, but for every day of this trial, it was a pleasure and a privilege to sit here with you guys, for your ability to think on your feet and report from where you were standing, for you bringing all your wealth of knowledge, for you sort of turning your private struggles there inside out for our viewers, and for you just you know, this is your chair forever for any story, forever and always. Thank you so much.
You know, we think it's all of our privilege.
Thank you. What were the odds, too, that this was going to happen yesterday at 4:20? There's still a ton to get to in our second hour. We're only halfway done. First, though, get your phones out. We want to remind you about this. For more on Donald Trump's guilty conviction and what comes next and the other investigations into him, along with all of the legal stories we cover right here, sign up for the Deadline Legal Newsletter for expert analysis from our very own Jordan Rubin. Just scan the QR code on your screen right now to have it delivered straight to your inbox. The next hour of Deadline White House with Michael Cohen live right here on set starts after a quick break. Don't go anywhere.
Last fall, I pled guilty in federal court to felonies for the benefit of, at the direction of, and in coordination with individual number one. And for the record, individual number one is President Donald J. Trump. I have lied, but I am not a liar. And I have done bad things, but I am not a bad man. I have fixed things, but I am no longer your fixer, Mr. Trump. And I am going to prison and have shattered the safety and security that I tried so hard to provide for my family.
Hi again, everybody. It's now 5 o'clock in New York. Until yesterday, the only person having to pay the legal consequences for interfering in the 2016 election with the illegal cover-up of hush money payments made to porn star Stormy Daniels was that man, Donald Trump's former lawyer, Michael Cohen. Cohen went to prison for what you just heard him describe: crimes that benefited and were directed by Individual 1, Donald Trump. It's no longer the case. Now, Individual 1 has been convicted by a jury of his peers. Yesterday's dramatic and consequential verdict in the election interference hush money case came down swiftly and decisively. Donald Trump was found guilty on all 34 felony counts. Michael Cohen's former boss is now the first ex-president to be convicted of a crime for which he will be sentenced on July 11th. Michael Cohen was the one who paid the hush money to help Donald Trump in the final days of the 2016 campaign. Michael Cohen was the one who was later repaid in installments, 12 of them, with some checks signed by Donald Trump himself from the Oval Office. Michael Cohen was the one who tied Trump directly to those payments. He was also the one who has been attacked repeatedly and ceaselessly by Donald Trump and Trump's legal team. The ending of Trump attorney Todd Blanche's closing argument went like this, quote, "You cannot send someone to prison. You cannot convict somebody based upon the words of Michael Cohen." But that's not what this case was at all. It wasn't just Michael Cohen's word or testimony. He was the prosecution's star witness, but the state built a meticulous case with documents and multiple witnesses and multiple pieces of evidence. Michael Cohen spoke about that last night when he joined all of us soon after the verdict was announced.
What ultimately was demonstrated was the fact that all of the testimony by the other witnesses that I had involvement with corroborated what I'd been saying for 6 years. And all of the evidence, the documentary evidence, emails, text messages, documents themselves, again, corroborated what I'd been saying for 6 years.
6 years. Just stop for a second. Close your eyes and remember what you were doing 6 years ago. 6 years. Today marks 9 years to the day that Donald Trump descended those golden escalators, to announce his run for the presidency. Well, he stood there again this morning in Trump Tower as a man now convicted of felony charges. This morning, he railed against the justice system that has finally held him accountable. While he acknowledged he's still under a gag order, Trump did go after Michael Cohen.
By the way, this was a highly qualified lawyer. Now, I'm not allowed to use his name because of the gag order. But, you know, he's a sleazebag. Everybody knows that. Took me a while to find out. But he was effective. He did work. But he wasn't a fixer. He was a lawyer. You know, they like to use the word fixer. He wasn't a fixer. He was a lawyer. At the time...
You say tomato, I say tomato. The conviction of Donald J. Trump on 34 felony counts is where we begin this hour with his former lawyer and fixer, Michael Cohen. He's the host of the Mea Culpa and Political Beatdown podcast. He's the author of the books Revenge, How Donald Trump Weaponized the U.S. Department of Justice Against His Critics, and Disloyal, a memoir. How you doing?
Hanging in there. I had the pleasure of watching the press conference today, was wondering whether or not that gag order was still actually in place. Because, once again, Donald just violated. He doesn't care about the law. He doesn't care about anything other than venting, like a petulant child.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing is nothing that he said was true. You know, Mary Trump said it best yesterday. He's now unhinged. And to listen to the rambling, meandering, just like Todd Blanche during his cross-examination, that rambling, meandering, sort of thought, that's all that he did. I think he embarrassed himself, not just in front of the folks that were working at the Trump Organization that were there filling the spaces.
That's who those folks are, right?
Yeah. But he's also embarrassing himself in front of anyone that was watching. He accomplished nothing with that. Zero.
What do you want now? Do you want closure? Do you want to move on? Do you want to never see or hear his name again? What do you want?
Now, unfortunately, what I want, I don't think I'll ever attain. I want peace. You can't have peace when Donald Trump is around, because one of the things he talks about in many of his books, it's a common theme. If you hit him, and it's in his mind that he's being hit, he needs to strike back at you 10 times harder. He needs to hurt you 10 times harder. And so long as the two of us exist on this planet at the same time, he will constantly seek to hurt me. And I will never be a punching bag to Donald Trump or anyone.
What do you think he's feeling right now?
I think he's incredibly unnerved. He's not 100% sure what's actually going on, and that's the part that's really scaring him the most. Nobody's telling him the truth. So, Donald, if you're watching, here's the truth. The truth is you're in trouble. The second truth is that you will be found guilty. Now, whether or not you end up doing any time behind bars, you've heard me say this before, which is I would prefer you not to be. And not because you don't deserve it, but rather because you possess secrets, you possess national security information that puts the rest of us at risk. And I don't trust you with that information behind bars, believing that you would sell that information for a bag of tuna or for a book of stamps. And that's my biggest concern. So a home confinement scenario would be just fine, the way I see it. And I believe that Judge Merchan, who I've said to several people today, I find him very Solomonian. He's really very even-keeled. He's incredibly judicious and respectful of the process, something Donald is not. I believe that he will make the right decision, and the right decision will be not just for Donald, but really for respect to the office of the presidency.
That he once held, or that he seeks
that he once held.
What is going to happen to Donald Trump now?
Yeah, look, I'm not a prognosticator, though I've been pretty good at it so far, to pat myself on the shoulder, if I may. I think Donald loses, and I think he loses by a landslide. While a lot of people may right now openly claim that they're supporting Trump, I think when you're standing in the voting booth and you say to yourself, can I really vote for a guy who is a convicted felon, who is already been charged with assault, in fact, rape? Can you go with somebody who is absolutely unhinged and says the wild and crazy and stupid things that this man says? Can you really put America in that position with whether it's adversaries or allies, with foreign dignitaries, where he will disrespect anyone? He will do anything so long as it benefits him. He will sell, as I believe that he has already done, shown top secret documents to adversaries or to folks who have no right to see those documents. We know that the Australian billionaire at Mar-a-Lago, the fact that the guy's a billionaire doesn't give him rights that you and I do not have. He did not have the right to see those documents. But Donald started waving them around like they were a comic book or, you know, some just random piece of paper. They are not. They are secrets that put American service persons in harm's way. One was about a nuclear sub and how many nuclear warheads are on that specific vessel. Are you crazy? I mean, who tells anybody that? It makes no sense. How about the fact that during Helsinki, he had no representative with him, and he was talking to Vladimir Putin, a KGB agent who was so much smarter than him, with Putin's translator. And he's just randomly talking. And, you know, the problem with Donald Trump when he talks, he says things. And that's the danger.
He thought you would act differently, I think, on the stand. And I accept all the analysis that suggests that he was sort of quarterbacking his own criminal defense here. I think that's your theory. Well,
Todd Blanche said it himself yesterday. He said, I mean, talk about now an attorney throwing his client under the bus. What was it? You know, look, do you really think that Donald Trump didn't actually coordinate the strategy of this defense? Well, by the way, as I called last night, thanks to Danya, I called Todd Blanche a sloat, the stupidest lawyer on the planet, right, of all time. You know, he is. How do you, as a competent attorney, or maybe incompetent in this case, allow your client to dictate to you a strategy of a defense when your client, not only is he unhinged, but he is not a lawyer. He doesn't know how to set up a proper strategy, especially.
But you explain that to me because he allowed you to set up a criminal conspiracy to influence the 2016 election. How does it happen?
Well, you end up doing things because Donald Trump directs you to do it. He tasks you to do things, and you do it. Now, mind you, I didn't do it on my own. I did it in coordination with him, with Alan Weisselberg, with David Pecker, with Dylan Howard, and with Hope Hicks, and a multitude of other people as well. I wasn't alone. I'm just the dope who ended up paying it because nobody else had the money to do it.
But are you surprised that there are still people doing things?
I'm blown away. I mean, I used Mark Meadows as the example from last night, and there's 100 others that are willing to fall onto the sword for a guy who doesn't understand what the word loyalty is. As, I've said this in my books. He's like First Avenue, one way. There's only one way with Donald Trump when it comes to loyalty, and why people haven't seen. Look at Rudy Giuliani. Look at John Eastman. Look at Jenna Ellis. Look at myself. Look at Mark Meadows. Look at dozens of people who are now criminally indicted. All for what? So that Donald Trump could come back to the White House, so that he could grift off the American people and allow his family to grift off the American people?
Let's talk about your testimony, because I think that, and I've said this to you, I think the frame around it in the media was really shallow. And I don't think it meshes with what the jury experienced with you. I think you went in there and you told them about your journey. You spoke in a really nuanced way with some affection about some of the earliest years where you worked for the Trump Organization. And you said it wasn't all bad. I had some incredible experiences.
I enjoyed my time, with Donald and with my colleagues. There were incredible learning experiences. There were projects that I never would have had a chance. I talk about it. I had an opportunity. As soon as I started there, I was able to work on creating a 1,000-acre landfill remediation project. I mean, I learned things about how to create a passive methane gas collection system. I never knew how to do any of that, and I learned it with my friends that were colleagues of mine at the Trump Organization. We figured it out. I mean, we didn't have anybody instructing us. And that challenge to me was extremely enticing. Then he placed me on the board. It was Donald, Alan Weisselberg, and myself. 3 convicts. Could you imagine? We're the board of the Miss Universe Organization.
That's incredible.
Right? The 3 of us. I just saw that.
So what do you think it was about sort of your strategy? And you were on with us last night with your lawyer, Danya Perry. What was the strategy of telling the whole story? You didn't just come in there and start whacking at Donald Trump. You told a story that I don't even know if everyone in the American media has heard it, about really, when you were offered the job, you told the story to the jury that you didn't go back to your old office. You just started right away. You didn't offer the sort of, the political hits that sometimes people get on shows like this. You told a fuller story. And I wonder what you think the value was in that, in terms of the jury.
So I think Alvin Bragg, Susan Hoffinger, and Josh Steinglass, just to name 3 of the, of the folks that were involved in this, the main folks, I think they laid out the strategy for a conviction brilliantly. Absolutely brilliant. You know how many pundits, even on your show, came back, oh, Michael Cohen's going to go in the middle, right? If there's 20 witnesses, he'll be like the 8th, the 9th, the 10th, 11th, 12th. Well, okay, not yours, other MSNBC shows and other channels as well. They always talk about, oh, he's going to go in the middle. You don't want him at the beginning. You don't want him at the end. They're going to put him, sandwich him because he's a flawed character witness and all that. Great. Great analysis. You're wrong. The strategy.
Was that hard to listen to?
Very much so, but I really didn't. I really shut off my television. I shut off my social media. And the reason that I did it is because listening, it just didn't make any sense at all. Their strategy, which again, I believe was brilliant, put the 19 other witnesses before. Let them tell the story. Let them corroborate all the information. in advance so that it's not the first time that the jury's hearing the story. And then you bring in Michael Cohen at the end. And I said this on the weekend with Alicia Menendez and with Mike Steele and Simone. Yeah. And I said to him, all the witnesses are key witnesses. I'm just the narrator of the story, and I'm going to bring the whole thing. I'm going to bring the whole thing home. I'm actually pretty good at telling a story, right? And that's what we did. They laid out all the information, all the key pieces of information that was necessary in order to take the charges and put them together and demonstrate to the jury that a crime has been committed here, went from misdemeanor to a felony, simply by meshing them together with the campaign finance and then the business records. Now, the fact is that the media calls it the hush money trial case and so on, and I hate that. I know. I'm never referring to you.
We'll give you time to vent against the media at the end, I promise. But let me ask you about the evidence that you helped sort of tour guide the jury through, because it felt, and I said this as I watched, the first 18 prosecution witnesses come up, I wondered out loud if in your 25 trips down to DA Bragg's office, if you helped them sort of reverse engineer, did you point them to documents? Did you point them to other people in the room? Did you aid them in your testimony in those 25 meetings to, well, I wasn't the only one in the room, Pecker was there, and Hope Hicks was there?
So I can't take the credit for directing, but I will take the credit for providing the information. They would take a document, and again, they asked me for my 2 cell phones. And one of them I knew where it was, the other one I had to go find. And I turned it over to them. And I want people to think for a second, would you let anybody just mirror your entire cell phone? You know, there are things that you say to your friends that you probably shouldn't. There are things that come to your emails and your text messages that you're probably not,
we all have dumb friends.
Everybody's got skeletons.
Stuff,
right? I didn't care because accountability and the protection of our democracy was worth whatever stupid embarrassment could possibly come out of a ridiculous email or something like that. And I turned it over to them willingly, and I signed it. I gave them the passcodes to it, and I said, knock yourselves out. And with that, they scoured through 1 million documents. They were like, but we don't understand this. Can you walk us through this?
What's an example of that?
So let's talk about the Alan Weisselberg one with the document. Yeah. I explained to them that there's a document that's out there. I gave to Alan Weisselberg, because he asked for it, from my Essential Consultants account, the transfer. And we wrote on
the wire transfer.
It's number 36. 35 and 36. Right. Now, 36, which was the Jeff McConney handwritten, I never saw that until the trial.
That's
his notes. The 35 was mine. And I was like, let me explain this to you. That's the one to the left.
Okay, so you pull that out.
Well, I didn't pull it out.
Or they had
I didn't have it. They managed to get it, and I believe they got it as a result of a subpoena to the Trump organization for that document. I don't believe I had that.
And then you explained it to them, and you told them that.
So I said, well, let me walk you through the chicken scratch that's Alan Weisselberg's handwriting. And I said, do you notice if you punch it back up, you'll see there's AW on it. He actually initialed it. That's there. That shows how much each month, and so on. It says AW. So I explained to them exactly. And with that, they were able to build a story about the payment, the reason for the payment, how I was going to be reimbursed back my money, right? They want to call it a legal fee, et cetera, et cetera. And then I walked them through, well, Jeff McConney is the controller. He basically, the way I described it to them is Donald Trump is the bank, Alan Weisselberg is the branch manager, and Jeff McConney is the teller, right? And Deborah Tarasoff is the back office.
Right.
And I explained it to them, and that's how they ended up putting the 4 together. Now, of course, Alan Weisselberg is
in Rikers, so he wasn't testifying, and he's not going to testify. But they got Deborah, and they were able to get McConney as well.
Yeah. All right, we have to sneak in a very short break. We have 1,000,001 other questions for you. We'll try to chip away at them on the other side. Don't go anywhere. We're back with Michael Cohen. Michael, I want to ask you about the defense's case, if we call it that. When they put Costello on the stand, it seemed insane because it felt like the part of your direct testimony that implicated Trump the most was the part about Costello. And then they put him up, which allowed the state to go back on cross and ask him, like the last thing the jury heard was about how Trump's sort of mobbed up cutout was trying to pull you into the fold through Rudy. What did you, just as a lawyer, what did you think of that?
So my road with Costello has been one that is fraught with all sorts of crazy controversy and back and forth attacks on one another. Bob Costello is a dirtbag. Say nothing less than that. The fact is, what I realized early on is that he was playing me through Rudy. And I realized early on that what he was looking to do is to use me in order to gain or garner more connection with Rudy, his friend, and Rudy with Donald. And anything that I would say to him would immediately go back to Donald. And therefore, if the fear is that I would cooperate, they would know in advance. It was sending a mole into your house. And I realized it early on. So I always kept him at a distance, but I kept him close enough in order to see what was going on, because I didn't want to be out of the fold. I wanted to know what was going on for my own self. Then I realized he was pushing for himself, for Donald, at my expense. And I was like, this has to stop. Why they put him on is because Donald is a myopic thinker. And again, when you have somebody like Donald running his own strategy of defense, it is a flawed defense. They saw Bob Costello in Congress. And Donald liked the way that he acted, the way he attacked me, the way he made stuff up. And by the way, you want to talk about a perjury charge? The entire thing, unless he wasn't under oath, that I don't know. But Donald liked the way that he attacked me. And he's like, we got to get this guy on. I could just see Donald saying, we got to get him on.
And Fox celebrated him. Laura Ingraham said the same.
Exactly. Right. Laura Toomer, the whole this guy, Trustee, and then you had the guy, the lawyer from GW University's law school, Turdley. This is the issue. So Donald's like, oh my God, this guy is the one who could help us to smash Cohen to smithereens. You see, the flawed defense is the destroy Michael Cohen defense.
Right.
That's the mistake that they were making. He believed that by destroying me, that would exonerate him from his crimes. And the answer is that's a flawed defense. You don't win your case by trying to damage a non-party subpoenaed witness. You do it based upon your own evidence, right, of your innocence. Right. Well, that wasn't what that's not what Donald's about. He doesn't have it. So the nice thing is the 19 other witnesses that came up, they pre-corroborated everything that I've been saying for 6 years.
I want to ask you what happens to Donald Trump now. We learned today that ahead of sentencing, he'll have to meet with some sort of official of the court. He'll have to go through things. Yeah, it's a probation. They're going to do what's called a pre-sentencing report. He's going to meet with someone. They're going to ask him 1,000,001 questions. The part that he's going to have personally a problem with, and that's, again, if they treat him the way they treat everyone, myself included. I went through it not once but twice. With the unconstitutional remand. But what they do is they sit you down and they take a full history on you. They force you to urinate in a cup, which you're doing in front of your probation officer. It's in a room that's all mirrored. I'm sure he's going to be very unhappy with that. Wow.
And, there's a lot of things that, you have to share, including all of your finances. He's going to have to put, his is significantly more complicated than the average. It's not the only one of its kind. There have been many people with significant money that have gone through the system, and they'll obviously put somebody on who's capable of understanding, but all of his freedoms now become limited. If he wants to travel, he's going to have to get a travel authorization request form. And he's going to have to fill it out just like everybody else and wait for the approval process. Now, I'm sure they're going to grant it, just as mine was continuously granted. And there's no reason that they shouldn't, but he has to surrender his passport, which I believe he's already done that. His firearms, his firearm license, he loses that. There's a lot of your liberties. Now, the question becomes whether or not he's going to be treated again like in the banking world. Is he going to lose, as I did, your banking relationships? Right. I don't know. He's friendly with Jamie Dimon of Chase. Will Jamie Dimon go to bat for him and risk the reputation of Chase or any of the others? Like, allegedly, he's got millions at like a Morgan Stanley account or something. Will he lose it like every other person? Right. Or are they going to give him some sort of special, dispensation?
Right. What do you think he does with this experience in terms of the rage and vitriol he directs toward his perceived political enemies?
Now, he's already made that crystal clear. He wants to be what he claims is the country's retribution. He wants to be their force. He's not talking about for anybody else other than himself. And one of the things that he said, like, for example, he wants to go after the president of MSNBC. He wants to use SEAL Team 6. This, again, it sounds so hyperbolic. It sounds so like Handmaid's Tale. It's like dystopian.
His supporters don't believe him, but I think we've seen him over 8 years.
If you're not going to believe what he's saying, how could you believe anything anybody else is going to say? These aren't Michael Cohen's words. These aren't Nicole Wallace's words. These are Donald Trump's words telling you on day number 1, he wants to rewrite the Constitution. He wants to confer all power to himself. He wants to use SEAL Team 6 to go after his enemies. He wants to throw everybody in Guantanamo Bay. Go throw them in Gitmo, and with the hands, with the accordion hands, right? Throw them all in Gitmo. No, you can't throw American citizens in Gitmo. It's not permitted. But it is under a Donald Trump regime.
How does he look to you? Does he look the same as he did in 2016?
No, he looks deflated. Now, I don't know if that's the Ozempic or if that's just the stress that's getting to him. But whatever it is, he does not look healthy. He looks as he should right now. He's concerned. The anxiety has got to be getting to him. I remember when, right after I pled and I had 60 days within which to report to Otisville, and I remember as you get closer to that 60-day, the anxiety really builds up because you realize, hey, this is coming. And he knows July 11th, he knows he's in trouble. He knows that you don't get 34 guilty counts against you and then you end up getting a slap on the wrist and you're only allowed 1 Mar-a-Lago burger, not 2, and no ice cream for a month. That's not how it works.
Yeah. When you were in solitary, did you...
Which time?
The first time, the 51 days.
No, first it was 35, then it was another 16.
So did you think, did you hope, did you contemplate that there would ever be accountability around this set of facts for Donald Trump?
When you're in solitary confinement, unfortunately, you live within your own head. And nobody wants to live in their own head. It's a very dangerous place to be. I wasn't thinking about Donald Trump. I wasn't thinking about accountability. I wasn't thinking about anything other than not being there, regardless on how you end up not being there. It's a very sad, sad place. It's lonely. There's keeping yourself occupied. I read a lot. I mean, I read 97 books. In fact, there's 2 shows on books that The Gentleman in Moscow I read, and
I read
also
that, and
The Tattooist of Auschwitz.
Yeah, I read that.
Yeah, I read those while I was in solitary as well. And they're very good shows on stream.
What do you mean you thought about not being there, not being on this planet?
Yeah. I mean, that's all you think. It's painful. Solitary confinement is painful. And the worst part for me, what made it even harder, when I first was put in there, it was for 14 days. And that was
Why were you put in solitary?
Because of COVID. And they had to make sure that you were COVID-free before they released you to your family. And it was a 14-day incubation period wherever you were at. So they put us all in solitary confinement. On the 13th day, I'm watching as a bunch of my fellow inmates are making phone calls to their family for arrangements to be picked up the next day, but not me. And all of a sudden, the camp administrator shows up and they unlock the door. And he tells me, you're not going home tomorrow. And I said, why not? Well, it turns out that Washington pulled my medical file and said that they want to review it. I said, but everybody else is leaving. Why my medical file? They're like, well, we don't know why. It's just yours was pulled and you're not leaving till after they end up getting your medical file, despite the fact that...
Who in Washington?
It was clearly Bill Barr at the direction of Donald Trump. And so not knowing when you're leaving, I said, well, then I want to go back to the camp. No, you can't go back to the camp. You just have to stay here. Well, for how long? We don't know yet. But it shouldn't be too long. 3 more weeks.
In solitary?
Yeah, is what they kept me. And, you know, for 35 days, but not knowing anything. And then my wife and my buddy Jeffrey K. Levine and a bunch of other people got together. They got my medical records from Lenox Hill Hospital, which showed that I have significant respiratory issues as a result of an earlier bout with pulmonary embolus that almost ended my life when I was 39. So I have compromised pulmonary issues, and it's been demonstrated, especially when it was COVID, the first round of COVID, that people who have issues, pulmonary issues, are more susceptible to death.
Yeah.
And so Lenox Hill, after sending another 179 pages, after 35 days, they finally released me. And that was only, you know, as a direct result of the medical staff. The medical staff had been advocating for my release from day number 1.
What is the threat environment like for you now, today?
It's the same but different. Instead of being there where they can affect your life, I mean, look at what they did. They had my file pulled. They put me and left me in solitary for an undisclosed amount of time because that's who Donald Trump is. Remember what I said before? If you hit me, I'm going to hit you 10 times harder. Giving him the power to do that puts everyone at risk, unless you bury your head in the sand and, you know, you wait the 4 years, and of course 4 with him will become 8, and 8 will become 12, and then so on, because that's what he wants.
What do you do if he's reelected?
I'm already speaking with relatives who live in another country, my cousins, about finding a home. You know? Yeah. I mean, I don't want to. I mean, this is my life. I have my parents here. I have my siblings, my children, my wife, my in-laws. We all live here. And who wants to leave their country? Who wants to renounce their citizenship? So I can't say for certain that I'm going to go, but it's certainly something that I talk about. You know, my father being a Holocaust survivor from Poland, I'm supposed to be entitled to a Polish passport. So I went to the Polish consulate. I'm like, well, this is going to take 18 months. I'm like, can we expedite it? You know?
Might not have 18.
I'm like, you know, I don't really think I have 18 months.
Michael Cohen, getting to talk to you before this happened really helped us understand and cover the trial as it was underway. But getting to have this conversation on the other side is really, really great. Thank you very much.
I'm glad you're enjoying it. It's a little painful for me, but
I know. We got deep. Yeah. We went deep. Will you come back? Will we keep it going?
For you, anytime.
Okay.
So good to see you.
Good to see you, my friend.
Thank you.
When we come back, this moment that we've been talking about, this moment for all of us, do we stay, do we go? What happens next? Is he reelected? Does the country actually elect twice impeached, 4 times indicted, and now criminally convicted on 34 counts ex-president? Our panel will weigh in on that on the other side of a short break. Don't go anywhere. That was something. There's nothing wrong, though, with feeling heartened this afternoon about the fact that the rule of law, which was tested, really pressure tested, and yesterday, after some strain, seemed to hold. Encouraging as that may be, we shouldn't fool ourselves into thinking this has been anything other than a bleak, albeit necessary moment in our country's history, one with as of yet untold consequences. Our institutions, already under profound direct threat, is now poised to bear the brunt of an all-out assault from those who insist Donald Trump is indeed above the law. Whatever happens, one thing is for certain. Our nation, our democracy will not ever be the same. Joining our conversation, president of the National Action Network, host of the Politics Nation broadcast right here on MSNBC, the Reverend Al Sharpton's back at the table. Also joining us, Puck chief political columnist, MSNBC political analyst, our dear friend John Heileman's here. Heilemann, what are you working through in your big brain today?
Well, the thing you said is, first of all, Nicole, that your interview with Michael Cohen just now was superb, and I congratulate you for it. I'm a student of a good long form interview, and you and Howard Stern are right up there at the top of my list. So
stop!
That was
stop! I love Howard Stern. Thank
you. That was a winner. That was a winner. Also, happy Friday. What am I working through? I think you said a thing a second ago that I think is just really right. And, there is, I saw some video yesterday of people, I understand why they're doing it, people cheering, in places when they saw the verdict was that Trump had been convicted in the way he's been convicted. And, I understand the feeling. And yet, if you try to step back and think about this from a historical standpoint, kind of the notion that we would ever have found ourselves in a place in a country where people at a sports bar were cheering over over an ex-president's conviction on 34 felony counts, you would have thought that we had reached a pretty sad place in the annals of America. But of course, a lot of us thought we'd reached a pretty sad place long before this. I agree with you that that we have stress tested. There are some parts of some of the guardrails in our democratic system have broken, and some of them are pretty close to breaking. You look at what's happened on some of these other legal fronts. The fact that our federal judiciary has failed so manifestly to get Donald Trump in front of to render judgment, whatever judgment, in the January 6th case down in Washington, that the Supreme Court is doing what it's doing, that the court in Florida is doing what it's doing. The judiciary, which held so fast in 2020. Is buckling in a lot of ways. And so I'm proud that New York's didn't and hasn't. But there's a lot of bad signs out there, because the reality is that the voters in America deserved to get to know whether Donald Trump is guilty of crimes in these other areas where he's been indicted. This is a small comfort in the sense that the rule of law held here. But you look around at these other 3 cases, the idea that we're not going to get to Election Day probably without verdicts in those cases, without hearing those cases in front of a court is a outrage and a profound disgrace. And there's a lot of blame to go around. But I am heartened, that at least in this one case, that the system seems to have worked the way it's supposed to work. And that a jury of Donald Trump's peers, some of whom are Truth Social people, some of whom are Fox News people, heard the evidence and made a clear and decisive finding. And I think clear and decisive is what you want here. A hung jury would not have been great. Even a split decision on a lot of these counts, because they're so closely related, would have been confusing. This has clarity to it. The president will now go on and appeal it. We'll see what the politics of it are. But if there was going to be an outcome that would have a political implication, that would have some significance in our electoral cycle, this was it. And now we'll see.
John Heilemann, I was just telling the Rev as he sat down, my insides hurt from still being able to be disappointed in the Republican Party. And I want to get to a point where they no longer can disappoint me. But I was disappointed anew to see their attacks on the rule of law, to see their vicious attacks on Judge Juan Merchan, who acted in a way that was almost overly overly generous to Trump's sometimes fumbling legal team, offering objections during the Stormy Daniels testimony on their behalf before they did. Are you still capable of being disappointed and surprised by anything the Republicans do?
Having never been a member of the Republican Party, I think disappointment never really has never been my thing. But depressed, I'm still capable of being depressed, and I think the reactions yesterday did not surprise me, only because I had already watched the truly beclowning and outrageous performance of so many of these people showing up at court, saying all these same things even before the verdict was rendered. You know, so many of those guys in their red ties and their blue suits, missing only the Trump fright wig to make the perfect kind of Donald Trump Halloween costume. They had already, you know, the Speaker of the House had already shown up outside the courtroom and done and made an outrageous fool of himself. So that they were being consistent yesterday with what their behavior had been like during the course of the trial. But if you're asking me, am I depressed by it? And do I think that the country needs a functional, non-corrupt, a party that has some fundamental faith in the rule of law and respect for American judicial institutions? Do we need a second party like that to be a healthy democracy? We do. Do we have one now? We don't. So I'm depressed as hell about that.
Yeah.
Still,
Rev,
every day.
This was also a New York story. Alvin Bragg versus Donald Trump, with Judge Juan Merchan presiding.
Very much a New York story, because even though Donald Trump went on to be president and known globally, he was a New York type figure. And I think that when I looked at that verdict yesterday, I thought he'd get maybe convicted on one or two. I had no idea, all 34. I thought about all of the cases we've fought in New York that he never opened his mouth but one time, and that was the Central Park case where 5 young black and brown boys were accused of beating and raping a white woman in Central Park. And Donald Trump, who never said anything about blacks being killed in Howard Beach or Bensonhurst all the way to Avenue Louima, took out ads in the newspaper to say that these guys ought to be facing the death penalty. And the irony of it, Nicole, is the same criminal court area that we marched for those boys when many doubted them, is the building he was in to be convicted 34 times. And then now if he goes to the appeals court, there's 5 black women judges on the appellate court. So he goes from the Central Park 5 to the appellate 5 black women in robes. So, you know, Dr. King used to say the arc of the universe is long, but it bends toward justice.
Yeah. What do you think he's going through right now?
I think that he is probably as on the verge of just total disbelief and depression. Anyone that knew Donald Trump, as I did for 40 years, fighting him, marching on him, then he tried to be friendly, knew he always wanted to prove to his father he could be the big businessman his father was. He wanted to show himself. And to have to now look in the mirror and know he's a felon and a failure, that he owes hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars, and the only reason he may not go to jail is on some legal quirk. He's everything his father says he was never going to be, and his father ended up being right. That hurts him. And to think that he'd be humiliated where Kwame Jackson will be on my show tomorrow with one of the Central Park 5, who he called the N-word, that we just got the tape. Well, for a black prosecutor to get this conviction, and he's got to face a black woman in Georgia and a black judge in Washington, he probably thinks that somebody's going to pinch him and he'll wake up, but he's not going to wake up. It's the real deal, Donald.
Well, I have both of you here with me. I want to share with our viewers some sad news we're just learning about. Since we've been on the air, we've learned that Marion Robinson, that's the mother of former First Lady Michelle Obama, sadly passed away. She was an incredible person. She moved to Washington with the Obamas when President Obama won. She was a living grandma at the White House during those 8 years. Robinson would later describe one of her biggest blessings this way, quote, getting to see my granddaughters grow up before her eyes. Just in the past year, the former First Lady announced the opening the White House exhibit in the Obama Presidential Center Museum would be named in her mother's honor. In the course of that dedication, Michelle Obama wrote this, quote, "Above all else, my mother gave me nonstop, unconditional love in so many ways. She fostered in me a deep sense of confidence in who I was and who I could be by teaching me how to think for myself, how to use my own voice, and how to understand my own worth. I simply would not be who I am today without her." In a statement, the former president and first lady and their family said this, quote, "Marion Lewis Shields Robinson, our mother, mother-in-law, and grandmother, had a way of summing up the truth about life in a word or two, maybe a quick phrase that made everyone around her stop and think. Her wisdom came off as almost innate, as something she was born with, but in reality, it was hard-earned, fashioned by her deep understanding that the world's roughest edges could always be sanded down with a little grace." It goes without saying, of course, our deepest condolences to the former First Lady and the President. The entire family is in our thoughts this afternoon. Rev, this was so important to Michelle Obama when President-elect Barack Obama won. I remember that she enlisted former President Bush and former First Lady Laura Bush in helping to persuade her mother to come to Washington with them. It was the foundation of what would become a very famous friendship between Michelle Obama and George W.
No, she was absolutely the anchor to that family. I was honored to go to many of the events in the 8 years the Obamas were there, and she was always there. We'd always seek her out. And she would always have a gentle way of dealing with people. She could always tell the phonies from the real people. And I remember just 2 or 3 years ago when he was former president, and I went to do the invocation at his 60th birthday in Martha's Vineyard. I spent some time talking to her. She was a solid person that never got swept up in who she had become and who her daughter had become and son-in-law. She was the real deal. And if there was an authentic woman in the White House, it was the mother of the First Lady, Michelle Obama's mom.
And it's so hard on a family with little kids. And I know having her there, I think they both felt like that allowed them to do the public service part of their jobs to have her there. Rev, Howman, thank you both so much for joining us on a day where we didn't have enough time to talk to either of you, but it's great to see both of your faces. Thank you. And thanks to all of you from the bottom of our hearts. Thank you so much for letting us into your homes day after day after day during these historic times for our country. The Beat with Ari Melber starts right after a very short break. Don't go anywhere.